Receiving the Holy Eucharist is the beating heart of a Catholic's life, a moment so sacred it's almost impossible to overstate. The Catechism of the Catholic Church calls it the source and summit of the Christian life, CCC 1324, meaning it's where our faith begins and where it peaks. Everything flows from and to this encounter. It's not a symbol, not a nostalgic nod to Jesus' Last Supper. It's Him, truly present in His body, blood, soul, and divinity, offered to us in a way that's both mind-blowing and humbling. But there's a catch. You can't just sort of stroll up to the altar and receive Him like it's no big deal. St. Paul lays it out in 1 Corinthians 11:27-29 with a warning that stops you cold. Whoever eats the bread or drinks the cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner will be guilty of profaning the body and blood of the Lord. For anyone who eats and drinks without discerning the body eats and drinks judgment on himself. That's not a gentle nudge, it's a spiritual red alert. Profaning Christ? Bringing judgment on yourself? This isn't about earning God's love. It's about approaching Him with the reverence He deserves, with a heart scrubbed clean by His mercy. If you're not there yet, don't sweat it, but don't fake it either. You've got a path back, and it starts with facing the truth. Picture the Last Supper. A cramped upper room in Jerusalem, the air thick with tension and the smell of bread baking nearby. 12 disciples, fishermen, tax collectors, regular guys, sitting around a table with Jesus, their teacher and Lord. They're not polished saints yet. They're rough, flawed, probably still bickering about who gets the best seat in the kingdom. Then Jesus does something wild. He grabs a basin, wraps a towel around His waist, and starts washing their feet, one by one, calluses and all. Peter, the loudmouth we all secretly relate to, freaks out, "Lord, you're not washing my feet." It's not just embarrassment. It's pride, discomfort, maybe even a little panic. Jesus doesn't back off. He locks eyes with Peter and says, "If I do not wash you, you have no part in me." John 13:8. That's not about dirt. It's about sin, about the state of their souls. Right after this, He takes bread, blesses it, breaks it, and says, "This is my body." He lifts the cup. "This is my blood." The first Eucharist isn't a casual handout. It's a sacred gift given to men He's just cleansed, a moment that sets the tone for every communion since. Jesus draws a line. You don't share in this unless you're ready, unless you've let Him purify you. Today, we're still missing that point, treating Mass like a social obligation or a feel-good pit stop when it's really a call to get real with God, to let Him wash us before we dare approach His table. St. Paul doesn't let us off the hook either. Writing to the Corinthians, a church already botching the Lord's Supper with drunkenness and cliques, he gets blunt. Whoever eats the bread or drinks the cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner will be guilty of profaning the body and blood of the Lord. Let a man examine himself. For anyone who eats and drinks without discerning the body eats and drinks judgment on himself. 1 Corinthians 11:27-29. Profaning isn't a minor oops, it's sacrilege, a direct offense against Christ's presence. Judgment on himself isn't a slap on the wrist. It's a soul-level consequence that echoes into eternity. Paul's not scaremongering. He's sounding an alarm because the Eucharist isn't a snack or a ritual prop. It's Jesus, fully alive, fully divine, fully demanding our respect. Being unworthy means carrying mortal sin, those big, deliberate acts that snap our connection to God, sins we know are wrong but choose anyway, like a middle finger to grace. I used to brush this off thinking, God's chill, He gets me. But that's a cop-out. It's not about Him being strict. It's about me being careless with something, someone infinitely holy. The stakes are high, and pretending otherwise doesn't change the truth. Here's where it got personal for me. A random Sunday, pews half full, the organ humming in the background. I'd had a garbage week, snapped at my boss, scrolled through some dark corners of the internet, skipped Mass the Sunday before, because self-care sounded holier than church. I was in the communion line, autopilot engaged, when Paul's words hit me like a brick. Guilty of profaning. My chest tightened. I glanced at the priest holding the host. Suddenly, it wasn't just bread, it was Him, and I wasn't ready. For the first time, I stepped out of line, shuffled back to my seat, and sat there, hands sweaty, heart racing. People stared. My buddy nudged me, whispering, "You good?" I nodded, but I wasn't. Not yet. I didn't receive that day, and it stung, but it also woke me up. I hit confession that week, spilled every ugly detail, and when the priest said, "I absolve you," it was like a weight lifted I didn't know I was carrying. The next Sunday, when I received communion, it wasn't routine. It was raw, real, like meeting Jesus face to face. That's when I got it. Staying back wasn't failure, it was honesty. Confession isn't a chore, it's a rescue. You don't have to stay unworthy. You just have to own it and let Him fix it. The church doesn't leave us guessing about what keeps us from the Eucharist. It spells it out with brutal clarity: mortal sins, the kind that demand confession before you even think about stepping up to the altar. These aren't petty infractions or guilt traps. They're serious breaches that fracture our bond with God, requiring His mercy to mend through the sacrament of reconciliation. C. 1857. Here's the full rundown: 12 soul-deep sins, what they mean, why they're a big deal, and how to tackle them head-on. 1. Missing Mass on Sundays or holy days, without a legitimate reason. The third commandment says, "Keep holy the Sabbath," and for Catholics, that's non-negotiable. Mass every Sunday and holy day isn't a suggestion. It's a lifeline to the Eucharist, the core of our worship. Blowing it off because you're hungover, the game's on, or you'd rather hit the mall isn't just slacking. It's a conscious no to God's call. A mortal sin unless you're sick, stranded, or caring for someone who is. Say you skip because Saturday night was a blur. You tell yourself, God understands. But it's not about Him bending, it's about you prioritizing. Face it by owning the choice, setting a Sunday game plan, alarm, no excuses, confessing it with intent to change, and showing up like it's the most important meeting of your life, because it is. 2. Sexual sins outside God's design. Sex is sacred, a gift meant for marriage, a total life-giving union between husband and wife. So anything outside that twists it, hooking up before marriage, masturbation, pornography, adultery, same-sex acts, all of it. This isn't the church being uptight. It's about guarding your dignity and God's plan. You're binging porn, thinking it's private, it's fine, but it's not. It warps your mind, reduces people to pixels, and severs grace. Face it by admitting it's a problem, confessing every instance. Yes, details matter. Finding accountability, a priest, a friend, and swapping the habit for something holy, prayer, a run, anything to break the cycle. It's tough, but freedom's worth it. 3. Cohabiting as spouses without marriage in the church, shacking up, sharing a bed, a lease, a life. Like you're married without the sacrament isn't almost holy. It's a dodge around God's covenant, which isn't just a ceremony, but a sacred bond. You say, we love each other, that's enough. But love without commitment, His way, leaves you exposed. Face it by talking to a priest, separating if you can, tough but honest, starting marriage prep, and confessing the presumption. It's a reset to build something real. 4. Desecrating the Eucharist. This is the gut punch, receiving communion while you know you're in mortal sin, piling sacrilege on top of sin. Paul calls it profaning Christ Himself, 1 Corinthians 11:27. You're in line, unconfessed, thinking, I'll look weird sitting down. But fear of judgment doesn't excuse disrespecting Jesus. Face it by staying back next time, hitting confession fast. Tell the priest you received unworthily, and vowing to check your soul before every Mass. Reverence starts with humility. 5. Using contraception to block life. Marriage is meant to be open to life, and contraception, pills, condoms, IUDs, says no to that, turning a sacred act into a sterile one against God's will. CCC 2366. You take the pill reasoning, we're not ready, but it's not about timing. It's about trust. Face it by exploring natural family planning. It's legit science now. Confessing the choice, talking to your spouse, and leaning into faith over fear. It's a shift, but it's liberating. 6. Participating in abortion. Ending a life, doing it, pushing it, paying for it, even advocating it knowingly, breaks the fifth commandment and carries excommunication in some cases. Canon 1398. It's a mortal sin that screams for mercy. You helped a friend get one, thinking, I'm supporting her, but you're complicit in a grave wrong. Face it by confessing immediately. Priests handle this with care. Joining a ministry like Rachel's Vineyard for healing and turning sorrow into action. God's forgiveness is real, but you've got to seek it. 7. Murder or destroying lives. Killing, homicide, euthanasia, embryonic destruction, or abusing others physically, verbally, psychologically violates human dignity and God's law. You snap, leaving bruises or scars thinking, they deserved it, but that's a lie. Violence poisons you too. Face it by confessing the act, name it, making amends, apologize, get help, and breaking the cycle. Mercy waits, but change is on you. 8. Grave injustice in work or life. Exploiting people, lowballing wages, lying in court, taking kickbacks, slandering, firing unjustly, trashes justice and love. It's not just business, it's sin. You stiff a worker thinking they'll manage, but you're stealing their livelihood. Face it by auditing your actions, confessing specifics, fixing what you can, pay up, retract lies, and choosing fairness. Integrity's hard but eternal. 9. Refusing to pay debts when able. Owing money's not the issue. Dodging repayment when you've got the means is breaking trust in the seventh commandment. You ignore a loan saying they're fine without it, but that's theft by neglect. Face it by listing debts, budgeting to pay, confessing the dodge, and settling up. Honesty rebuilds what laziness broke. 10. Stealing valuable goods or money, taking what's not yours, cash, stuff, even streaming pirated movies, crosses a line. Value and intent make it mortal. You snag a coworker's cash, planning to replace it later, but intent doesn't erase the act. Face it by returning it, or its worth, confessing the theft and killing the habit. Greed's a liar. Cut it off. 11. Harboring hatred or deep-seated anger. Jesus says hating is like murdering. Matthew 5:22. Letting resentment fester into bitterness or revenge chokes your soul. You stew over a betrayal, cursing them in your head, but that's not justice, it's poison. Face it by praying for them, grit your teeth if you must, confessing the hate and releasing it. Forgiveness isn't for them, it's for you. 12th, letting pride, greed, laziness, or envy rule you. These deadly sins aren't quaint, they're lethal when they run your life. Pride puts you above God. Greed hoards over gives. Laziness skips duty. Envy hates others' good. You blow off a friend's need thinking, I deserve more, and that's a cocktail of all four. Face it by naming the sin in confession, e.g., I envied her success. Countering it, give, serve, celebrate, and rooting it out. Humility wins every time. The fix for all these? Confession, raw, real, no holding back. Walk in, spill it, walk out clean. If it's chronic, get a priest's guidance, a support crew, daily prayer, whatever it takes, because grace is worth the grind. We're drowning in a culture of live your truth. No boundaries, no accountability, just vibes. The Eucharist smashes that illusion. It's not about what you want, it's about what's real. A truth so solid it demands you stop, look at yourself, and get right. In a world of instant fixes, swipe, click, done, this slows you down, forces you to reckon with your soul, and that's radical as hell. It's not old school baggage, it's a rebellion against shallow living, a call to stand out by kneeling down. Next Mass, don't coast. Ask, am I clean? Has he washed me? If not, sit it out, hit confession, come back ready. You're not taking bread, you're taking him, and he's worth every ounce of effort.